Picture this. You're 65 years old, sitting in your own living room, and you feel like a prisoner. Not because of your age, not because of your health, but because of the people you've allowed into your life. Sound familiar? Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, wrote these words while leading the Roman Empire. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But here's what's fascinating. This emperor, who commanded armies and ruled nations, spent most of his private journals writing about one thing: how to protect his inner peace from the people around him. Even the most powerful person in history struggled with toxic relationships. What does that tell you about your own situation? If you're over 55 and watching this, I need you to ask yourself a hard question. Do you feel more energized or more drained after spending time with the people closest to you? Be honest, your answer might shock you. Now, I'm going to tell you about 6 types of people that will absolutely destroy your golden years if you let them. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. There's one type that Frank, who you'll meet in a moment, says is in almost every family. The worst part? They fly completely under the radar. Most people never even realize they're dealing with this person until the damage is already done. I'm talking about folks who've worked their entire lives, who remember when a handshake meant something, when people took responsibility for their actions, and when respect wasn't something you had to fight for every single day. You've earned your stripes. You've paid your dues. You've survived decades of other people's drama, economic downturns, health scares, and life transitions that would break someone half your age. So why? Why are you still letting energy vampires, guilt trippers, and emotional manipulators steal your peace? Here's a statistic that'll make your blood boil. Studies show that adults over 55 who live with toxic family members have a 40% higher rate of depression and anxiety than those who live alone. 40%! That means the people who are supposed to love you might literally be making you sick. But here's what the research doesn't tell you, and what I'm about to share is exactly how to identify these peace stealers and what to do about them. I've been studying Stoic philosophy for over 2 decades, and I've seen how these ancient principles can transform lives. Seneca, who advised emperors and accumulated incredible wealth, lost everything multiple times: his fortune, his position, even faced execution. You know what he said was the most important thing he learned? Associate with people who are likely to improve you. At your age, this isn't just good advice, it's survival. Now, one of these 6 types of people is so dangerous that they can turn your own children against you. Another type will literally make you question your own sanity. And there's one that's so subtle, so seemingly caring, that you'll thank them for destroying your independence. Your nervous system has been through enough. Your blood pressure doesn't need more stress. Your sleep doesn't need more interruption. And your bank account certainly doesn't need more drama. But here's the hopeful part, and why you need to stick around for this entire story. Once you learn to identify these people and set proper boundaries, something magical happens. Your energy returns, your confidence comes back, you start sleeping better, laughing more, and actually enjoying your golden years instead of just surviving them. If you're tired of walking on eggshells in your own life, if you're ready to put your peace first, hit that subscribe button right now. Consider it your first act of rebellion against anyone who thinks they can control your happiness. And ring that notification bell, because what I'm about to share could literally add years to your life. Before I introduce you to Frank, the man who figured all this out the hard way, let me tell you why the ancient Stoics were obsessed with this topic. Epictetus, who was born a slave and knew more about toxic relationships than any of us ever will, spent his entire philosophy teaching one core principle: You can't control other people, but you can control your response to them. That sounds simple, but it's the hardest lesson most people never learn, especially when the toxic person is your own child, your sibling, or someone you've loved for decades. The Stoics didn't just teach this philosophy, they lived it. When Seneca was falsely accused and sentenced to death by Emperor Nero, you know what he did? He invited friends over for dinner and spent his last hours teaching them how to maintain their peace regardless of circumstances. That's the level of inner strength we're talking about here. And at your age, with your life experience, you're perfectly positioned to achieve it. Now, Frank, the man you're about to meet, learned these lessons at 72 years old. He told me something that'll stick with you forever. I spent 40 years trying to fix broken people, and all I got was broken myself. The day I stopped trying to change others and started protecting my peace, everything changed. Frank's story will show you exactly how to spot these 6 types of people, how to set boundaries that actually work, and most importantly, how to reclaim your golden years from anyone who's been stealing them. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. Frank also discovered that one of these toxic types often masquerades as your biggest helper. They'll convince you they're doing everything for your own good while slowly stripping away your independence. By the time you realize what's happening, you're living like a guest in your own life. So if you've ever felt like you're losing yourself to keep others happy, if you've ever wondered why your own home doesn't feel peaceful anymore, or if you've ever caught yourself thinking, is this really how I want to spend my remaining years? Then Frank's story is exactly what you need to hear. And trust me, by the end, you'll have a phrase that'll become your new superpower. Frank calls it your peace protection mantra, and it's so simple that you'll wish you'd learned it decades ago. Now, let me take you to a quiet town in Montana where Frank discovered that the secret to golden years isn't more money, better health, or even more time. It's simply knowing which people deserve access to your peace and which ones don't.
In the heart of Montana, where the Rocky Mountains stand like ancient guardians of wisdom, there's a small town called Cedar Falls. Population 3,847. The kind of place where people still wave at strangers and where the coffee shop has known your order for 20 years. In this town lived Frank Morrison, 72 years old, a retired mechanical engineer who'd built bridges that still carry traffic today. But what people noticed about Frank wasn't his professional accomplishments, it was something else entirely. Frank had what psychologists call presence. When he walked into Murphy's Diner every Tuesday morning, conversations didn't stop, they got better. When he sat on his front porch in the evenings, neighbors found excuses to walk by just to chat. There was something about Frank that made people feel calmer. His neighbor, Bill Patterson, had been watching Frank for 3 years. Bill was 58, recently divorced, struggling with his adult kids who seemed to need constant rescuing, and feeling like life was happening to him instead of for him. One crisp October afternoon, as the aspens were turning gold and the air carried that promise of winter, Bill finally worked up the courage to approach Frank. He found him on his wraparound porch, reading what looked like a worn leather journal. "Marcus Aurelius," Frank said, noticing Bill's glance at the book. "Meditations. In reading the same copy for 15 years. Every time I think I've learned everything it has to teach me, life shows me I was wrong." Bill settled into the wooden rocking chair beside Frank, a chair that had become his unofficial therapy seat over the past few months. "Frank, can I ask you something that might sound weird?" "Shoot." "How do you do it?" Bill's voice carried a weight that surprised them both. "I mean, you seem so peaceful. I wake up every morning feeling like I'm drowning in other people's problems. My ex-wife calls with crises, my son needs money again, my daughter wants me to take sides in her marriage problems. Meanwhile, you're over here reading philosophy and looking like you've got life figured out." Frank closed his book and looked out at the mountains. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle creaking of their chairs and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. Marcus Aurelius had been reading the same copy of Meditations for 15 years. "Whenever I think I've learned everything it has to teach me, life shows me I was wrong." Here's what changed everything for me, Bill. I realized there are exactly 6 types of people who'll steal your peace if you let them. And once I learned to identify them and set proper boundaries, my entire life transformed. Bill's eyes widened. 6 types? 6 types. And Bill, I'm going to guess that you've got at least 4 of them in your life right now. The crazy part is, most people never recognize them because they often come disguised as people who care about you. Frank stood up and walked to the porch railing, gazing out at the valley below. There's one type that's in almost every family, mine included. They're so good at what they do that they fly completely under the radar. Most people never realize they're dealing with this person until the emotional damage is already done. "What kind of damage?" Bill asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. "The kind that makes you question your own sanity. The kind that turns your own children against you. The kind where someone convinces you they're helping while they systematically destroy your independence." Bill felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Frank, I think I need to hear about all 6 of these types." Frank smiled, but it was the sad smile of someone who'd learned hard lessons. "I figured you might. But Bill, before I tell you about them, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't about cutting people out of your life or becoming selfish. This is about survival. At our age, stress literally kills. The Mayo Clinic has proven that chronic relationship stress can take years off your life. More importantly," Frank continued, turning back to face Bill, "you've earned the right to peace. You've worked, you've sacrificed, you've put others first for decades. If you don't protect your peace now, when will you?" Bill nodded slowly. "Okay, Frank, I'm ready. Tell me about these 6 types of people." Frank settled back into his chair and picked up his coffee mug, a ceramic piece his granddaughter had made in pottery class, painted with the words, "Grandpa's Peace Zone." "All right, Bill, let's start with the most dangerous one, the type that'll literally make you question your own sanity."
"Bill, the first type will literally make you question your own sanity," Frank said, his voice taking on a serious tone. "I call them energy vampires, and they're the most dangerous because they don't just drain your energy. They make you think you're the problem." Bill shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean, question my sanity?" Ever spent time with someone and walked away feeling completely exhausted, even though you were just sitting and talking? Ever found yourself doubting your own memory of conversations? Ever felt like you were going crazy because someone's version of events was completely different from yours? Bill's face went pale. "My ex-wife." Energy vampires are masters of emotional manipulation. They don't just complain, they weaponize their problems. Every conversation becomes about their crisis, their pain, their drama. But here's the insidious part. They make you feel guilty for not being able to fix them. Frank leaned forward. "Let me tell you about my sister-in-law, Margaret. Sweet woman, or so I thought. After my brother died, she moved in with us, temporarily, while she got back on her feet. That was supposed to be 6 months. It turned into 3 years of pure hell. Every morning started with Margaret's problems. Her back hurt, her neighbors were too loud, the grocery store clerk was rude, the weather was wrong, the news was depressing. But it wasn't just complaining, Bill, it was surgical." Bill frowned. "Surgical?" She had this ability to find exactly what would upset you most and focus on that. If I mentioned enjoying a good day at work, she'd immediately launch into how her arthritis was flaring up and she'd never be able to work again. If my wife talked about planning a weekend trip, Margaret would suddenly have a panic attack about being left alone. Frank's jaw tightened at the memory. The worst part was how she'd twist everything. If I suggested she might want to see a therapist, she'd cry and say I was trying to get rid of her because she was damaged goods. If I didn't respond to her complaints with enough sympathy, she'd accuse me of not caring about family. But here's where it gets really evil, Bill. She started doing what I call reality revision. She'd tell me I said things I never said, agreed to things I never agreed to, made promises I never made. When I'd correct her, she'd look at me with these wounded eyes and say, "Frank, I'm worried about your memory. Maybe you should see a doctor." Bill's eyes widened. She was gaslighting you. Exactly. And it was so gradual, so subtle, that I started questioning myself. Was I really becoming forgetful? Was I being unreasonable? Was I a bad person for feeling frustrated with someone who was clearly suffering? Frank stood up and walked to the porch railing. The breaking point came when my own wife started doubting me. Margaret had gotten so good at her manipulation that she'd convinced Linda that I was becoming difficult and unsympathetic. I was losing my mind, Bill, literally. What did you do? I started keeping a journal. Every conversation, every interaction, every promise made or broken. Within 2 weeks, I had documented proof of the pattern. Margaret would say one thing, then claim she had said something completely different. She'd create crises to get attention, then deny creating them when called out. Frank turned back to Bill. You know what Epictetus said? Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. I realized I was spending so much energy trying to prove I wasn't crazy that I was actually going crazy. The day I showed Linda my journal, everything clicked. She saw the pattern too. We sat Margaret down and gave her a choice, either get professional help or find another place to live. She chose to move out, but not before telling half the family that we'd abandoned her in her time of need. Bill shook his head. That's incredible. But how do you spot these people before they do that much damage? Great question. Energy vampires have specific patterns. First, they're emotional black holes. No amount of support, advice, or help is ever enough. Second, they specialize in crisis creation. Just when things start to calm down, they manufacture new drama. Third, they're masters of victimization. Nothing is ever their fault, and they expect you to fix everything. Frank counted on his fingers. Fourth, they practice selective memory. They remember every slight against them, but forget every kindness you've shown them. Fifth, they're conversation hijackers. Try to share good news, and they'll immediately one-up you with their problems. And finally, they're guilt specialists. They make you feel responsible for their emotional state. The scariest part is, Bill, they often target the most caring, empathetic people. They have a radar for folks who feel responsible for others' happiness. If you're a natural helper, you're their perfect victim. Bill was quiet for a long moment. Frank, I think I've been living with an energy vampire for the past 2 years. My ex-wife calls me every day with some crisis. I hang up feeling drained and guilty, but I couldn't put my finger on why. That's exactly how they work. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you can improve." Energy vampires don't want to improve, they want to consume. They feed off your emotional energy, and they'll keep feeding until you're completely depleted. Frank sat back down. Here's what I learned. You can't fix an energy vampire, Bill. You can't love them into being healthy. You can't give them enough attention to fill their emotional void. The only thing you can do is protect yourself. But that's not the worst type, Bill. The second type is even more dangerous because they don't just drain you. They can actually turn your own children against you, and they do it so skillfully that you won't even realize it's happening until it's too late.
The second type is particularly cruel because they can turn your own children against you, Frank said, his voice growing darker. I call them drama magnets, and they're experts at triangulation, pitting family members against each other while positioning themselves as the innocent victim. Bill leaned forward. how do they turn your kids against you? They create chaos, then blame you for the fallout. Let me tell you about my neighbor Carol. Sweet 68-year-old grandmother who moved in with her son's family after her husband died. Within 6 months, that peaceful household became a war zone. Frank shook his head. Carol couldn't exist without drama. If there was peace in the house, she'd manufacture conflict. She'd tell her daughter-in-law that her son complained about her cooking. She'd tell her son that his wife was disrespectful behind his back. She'd tell the grandkids that their parents were too strict and she'd handle their punishments. But here's the genius of it, Bill. She never lied outright. She'd take tiny grains of truth and blow them into massive storms. Her son mentioned once that dinner was a bit salty. Carol turned that into, "Your son says he can't stand your cooking and wishes he'd married someone who knew how to take care of him." "That's diabolical," Bill whispered. It gets worse. When the daughter-in-law confronted her son, he'd defend his mother. "She's screaming, honey. She's just trying to help." Carol positioned herself as the fragile, well-meaning grandmother who was being misunderstood by the mean daughter-in-law. Frank counted on his fingers. Drama magnets have 3 signature moves. First, they're pot stirrers. They share concerns and observations that create conflict between others. Second, they're professional victims. When confronted, they collapse into tears about how they're just trying to help and everyone is so mean to them. Third, they're loyalty testers. They force people to choose sides, usually by saying things like, "I guess you care more about her feelings than your own mother." The end result was Carol's son had to choose between his wife and his mother. The grandkids started acting out because they were getting mixed messages from the adults. Family dinners became battlefields. Everyone was walking on eggshells, trying not to upset Carol, who was supposedly the most fragile person in the house. Bill shook his head. What happened? The daughter-in-law finally figured out the pattern. She started documenting Carol's comments and timing her dramatic episodes. Guess what? They always happened right when the family was having a good time together. Carol couldn't tolerate harmony. It made her feel invisible. When they confronted Carol with evidence, she played her final card. "After everything I've done for this family, this is how you treat me? Your father would be ashamed." She packed her bags dramatically and moved in with her daughter, swearing they'd driven her away. Frank paused. 6 months later, her daughter called, desperate. The same pattern had started over there. Carol was now pitting the daughter against her husband, creating chaos wherever she went. Here's what I learned from watching this train wreck, Bill. Drama magnets are addicted to intensity. They mistake chaos for excitement, conflict for connection. They literally don't know how to exist in peaceful environments. If you live with one, you'll never have peace, because they'll sabotage it every single time. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. Drama magnets force you to constantly monitor everyone's reactions, always bracing for the next explosion. That's no way to live at our age. But Bill, if you think drama magnets are bad, wait until you hear about the third type. This one is so subtle, so seemingly caring, that you'll actually thank them while they systematically destroy your independence. They're the most dangerous because they disguise control as love.
Now, this third type, Frank's voice grew serious, is the most dangerous because they're so subtle, so seemingly caring, that you'll actually thank them while they destroy your independence. I call them controllers, and they're masters of disguising control as care. Bill frowned. How do you thank someone for destroying your independence? Because they make you believe they're saving you from yourself. Let me tell you about my friend Harold. At 70, Harold was sharp as a tack, managed his own finances, drove himself everywhere, maintained his house. Then his daughter Sarah moved back home after her divorce. Frank's jaw tightened. It started innocently. Dad, let me handle your bills this month so you can relax. Dad, maybe I should drive. The roads are icy. Dad, let me talk to your doctor about your medications. Harold was grateful. He thought, how lucky am I to have such a caring daughter? But notice the pattern, Bill. Every offer removed Harold's autonomy while making him feel cared for. Within 6 months, Sarah had taken over his bank accounts, was screening his phone calls, and had convinced him he shouldn't drive anymore because his reflexes weren't what they used to be. When Harold's friends invited him to their weekly poker game, Sarah would say, "Dad, you've been looking tired. Maybe you should stay home and rest." When he wanted to visit his sister, it was, "Dad, that's a long drive. What if something happens? I'd never forgive myself." Bill shook his head. She was turning him into a child. Exactly, but here's the insidious part. Harold defended her. When his brother expressed concern, Harold said, "Sarah's just looking out for me. I'm lucky to have someone who cares so much." Controllers are brilliant at making their victims complicit in their own imprisonment. Frank counted off the warning signs. Controllers use 3 main tactics. Assumed authority. They make decisions for you without asking, then present them as already handled. False emergencies. They create urgency around normal situations to justify taking control. And guilt-wrapped control. They make you feel selfish for wanting independence. The breaking point came when Harold's doctor asked to speak with him privately. Sarah insisted on being in the room to help Harold remember what the doctor said. When the doctor asked Sarah to step out, she said, "Dad gets confused easily now. I need to be here to make sure he understands." That's when Harold realized what had happened. He looked at the doctor and said, "I'm not confused, I'm imprisoned." The doctor helped Harold understand that Sarah wasn't protecting him, she was controlling him to meet her own need to feel important and needed. "What did Harold do?" Bill asked. He had to fight for his independence like a teenager fighting for freedom. He changed his bank passwords, took back control of his medical decisions, and started driving again. Sarah threw a fit, crying that he was being reckless and didn't care about her feelings, but Harold held firm. Frank leaned back. Epictetus said, "No one can hurt you without your permission." Controllers are dangerous because they get your permission by convincing you they're helping you. They make dependence feel like love and independence feel like selfishness. The scariest part? Harold almost thanks Sarah for taking such good care of him, even while she was stealing his autonomy. That's how good controllers are at their manipulation. But Bill, if you think controllers are subtle, wait until you hear about the 4th type. This is the one I mentioned that's in almost every family. They fly completely under the radar because they disguise manipulation as love, and most people never realize they're dealing with one until the emotional damage is done.
Here's the type I mentioned that's in almost every family, Frank said, his voice growing softer but more intense. They fly completely under the radar because they disguise manipulation as love. I call them guilt trippers, and they're masters of emotional blackmail. Bill shifted. How do they stay hidden if they're so manipulative? Because they never ask for what they want directly. Instead, they make you feel terrible for not reading their minds. They weaponize your love against you, Bill. Let me tell you about my own mother. God rest her soul. Frank's expression grew pained. Mom was the queen of guilt trips, but she was so subtle about it that it took me 40 years to recognize the pattern. She never said, "I want you to visit more." Instead, she'd say, "I just sit here all day wondering if you're okay. I guess you're too busy with your own life to worry about your old mother." She never said, "I want you to call daily." She'd say, "Mrs. Johnson's son calls her every morning. She's so lucky. Some children actually care about their parents." When I'd call the next day, she'd add, "Oh, I'm surprised to hear from you. I thought maybe something had happened to you since it's been so long." Bill winced. That's brutal. The genius of guilt trippers is they make every interaction a test of your love. They keep a mental scoreboard of every visit, every call, every favor, and you're always losing. They remember every birthday you almost forgot, but conveniently forget the surprise party you threw them. Frank counted the patterns. Guilt trippers use 3 weapons: comparative suffering, other people's children visit more; martyrdom, don't worry about me, I'll just suffer in silence; and historical ammunition. They keep a detailed inventory of every time you've disappointed them, going back decades. The most insidious part, they make you believe their emotional state is your responsibility. When mom was unhappy, it was because I wasn't being a good son. When she was lonely, it was because I was selfish. When she was worried, it was because I wasn't considerate enough to call. I spent years walking on eggshells trying to anticipate her needs, feeling guilty for having my own life. Every decision I made came with the question, what will mom think? Not what's best for me or what makes sense, but will this make mom feel abandoned? Bill nodded slowly. My ex-wife does this. Every time I want to do something for myself, suddenly she has a crisis that only I can solve. If I don't drop everything, I'm selfish and don't care about family. Exactly. Guilt trippers are emotional puppet masters. They pull your strings using obligation, duty, and love. They make normal boundaries feel like betrayal, and healthy independence feel like abandonment. Frank's voice grew firm. Here's what changed everything for me. I realized that love shouldn't feel like a debt. Real love celebrates your happiness, not resents it. Real love wants you to thrive, not just survive to serve their emotional needs. Seneca wrote, "Every new thing excites the mind, but a grudge is merely an old pain." Guilt trippers live in grudges. They collect your past mistakes like weapons for future battles. They turn love into a transaction where you're always owing more than you can pay. The day I stopped trying to manage my mother's emotions was the day our relationship actually improved. When she started a guilt trip, I'd say, "Mom, I love you and I'm not going to feel guilty for living my life." It was hard, but it worked. But Bill, even guilt trippers aren't the worst. The 5th type will actually crush your dreams while claiming to protect you. They're the ones who convince you that your age is a limitation instead of an advantage.
The 5th type will crush your dreams while claiming to protect you, Frank said, his voice carrying a mix of anger and sadness. I call them dream crushers, and they're experts at convincing you that your age is a limitation instead of an advantage. They kill possibilities before they can even breathe. Bill leaned forward. How do they crush dreams while claiming to protect you? They use your age as a weapon against your aspirations. Let me tell you about my brother-in-law, Robert. When I turned 65 and mentioned wanting to learn Spanish and maybe travel to South America, Robert immediately jumped in with his concern. Frank's voice took on a mocking tone. "Frank, aren't you a little old to be learning new languages? That's something you do when you're young. At your age, shouldn't you be thinking about slowing down? What if you get sick in a foreign country? Who's going to take care of you?" He made it sound like caring, but what he was really doing was murdering my dream before it could grow. When my neighbor mentioned wanting to start a small business at 62, Robert was right there. "Starting a business at your age? That's risky. You should be thinking about retirement, not taking on more stress. What if it fails? You could lose everything." He positioned himself as the voice of reason, but he was actually the voice of fear. Bill shook his head. "That's terrible. Did people listen to him?" "Unfortunately, yes. Robert had this way of making ambitious dreams sound like dangerous delusions. He'd use phrases like, 'at your age,' 'be realistic,' and 'you need to think about your limitations.' He turned age into a prison sentence instead of a badge of honor." Frank counted off the dream crusher tactics. First, they use age shaming, constantly reminding you that you're too old for new adventures.
Second, they catastrophize. They imagine every possible worst-case scenario and present them as inevitable. Third, they disguise discouragement as wisdom, saying things like, "I'm just being realistic," or "I don't want to see you get hurt." But here's what really burns me up, Bill. Dream crushers rob people of their last chapter. They convince 60, 70, 80-year-olds that their time for growth, adventure, and new experiences is over. They turn the golden years into the settling years. What did you do about Robert? I ignored him and learned Spanish anyway. Spent 3 months in Argentina when I was 67. Best experience of my life. When I came back fluent and full of stories, Robert couldn't stand it. He actually said, "Well, you got lucky, nothing bad happened." He couldn't celebrate my success because it proved his limitations wrong. Frank's voice grew passionate. Marcus Aurelius became emperor at 40 and wrote his greatest philosophical works in his 60s while fighting wars on the frontier. Grandma Moses didn't start painting until she was 78 and became one of America's most celebrated artists. At our age, we have wisdom, resources, and freedom that young people can only dream of. Dream crushers want you to believe that dreams have expiration dates. They don't. They want you to think that playing it safe is wisdom. It's not. It's fear. They want you to shrink your world when you should be expanding it. Here's what I learned, Bill. Dream crushers are usually people who gave up on their own dreams and can't stand watching others pursue theirs. They project their regrets on your possibilities. They make their failures your limitations. But even dream crushers aren't the worst, Bill. The sixth and final type is the most exhausting because they turn every conversation into a competition of suffering. They're professional victims who make misery an art form, and they'll drain every ounce of joy from your golden years if you let them.
The sixth and final type is the most exhausting because they turn every conversation into a competition of suffering, Frank said, his voice heavy with experience. I call them professional victims, and they've turned misery into an art form. They'll drain every ounce of joy from your golden years if you let them. Bill looked confused. A competition of suffering? They can't let anyone else have problems, Bill. If you mention you have a headache, they have a migraine. If your knee hurts, their back is killing them. If you're worried about your finances, they're practically bankrupt. They keep a mental scoreboard where they're always winning the misery contest. Frank shook his head. I had a friend, well, I thought he was a friend, named Eddie. Every phone call was a catalog of his suffering. His arthritis, his ungrateful kids, his terrible neighbors, his worthless doctors, his unfair bills. But here's the thing that made me realize he was a professional victim. He didn't want solutions. What do you mean? Bill asked. I'd offer practical help. Eddie, maybe try this doctor, or have you considered this treatment? He'd always have an excuse why nothing would work. I tried that years ago. That doctor is too expensive. That won't work for someone like me. He wasn't looking for solutions. He was collecting sympathy. Frank counted off the warning signs. Professional victims have 3 signature behaviors. First, they're problem collectors. They hoard grievances like trophies. Second, they're solution resistant. They shoot down every suggestion because solving problems would end their victim status. Third, they're joy assassins. They can't stand when others are happy because it threatens their narrative that life is terrible. The worst part was how Eddie would hijack good news. If I mentioned my granddaughter got into college, Eddie would immediately launch into how his grandson dropped out and broke his heart. If I talked about a nice vacation, he'd complain about how he could never afford to travel because of his medical bills. Bill winced. That sounds exhausting. It was killing me, Bill. Every conversation left me feeling drained and depressed. I started dreading his calls. That's when I realized professional victims are emotional parasites. They feed off your sympathy, your energy, your willingness to listen to their endless complaints. The breaking point came when my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. I called Eddie for support, and you know what he did? He immediately started talking about his prostate issues and how doctors never take men's health seriously.
He couldn't even let me have my moment of fear and need without making it about him. Frank's voice grew firm. That's when I understood what Stoic philosophers mean when they talk about emotional boundaries. Epictetus wrote, "Don't let anyone's opinion of you disturb your inner peace." Professional victims want to drag you into their pit of despair, their emotional quicksand. "What did you do about Eddie?" Bill asked. "I had to cut him loose. When he called with his daily dose of misery, I'd say, 'Eddie, I care about you, but I'm not available to discuss problems without solutions.' He got angry, said I'd become cold and uncaring. Last I heard, he'd found a new group of friends to dump his problems on." Here's what I learned, Bill. Professional victims choose misery. They're addicted to the attention that suffering brings them. They'd rather be right about how terrible their life is than actually improve it. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Frank stood up and placed his hand on Bill's shoulder. "So, there you have it. The 6 types of people who will steal your peace if you let them. Energy vampires who make you question your sanity. Drama magnets who turn your family against you. Controllers who destroy your independence while calling it care. Guilt trippers who weaponize you love. Dream crushers who convince you you're too old for new adventures, and professional victims who turn every interaction into a misery contest." Bill looked overwhelmed. "Frank, this is my entire social circle. How do I deal with all of this?" Frank smiled, but this time it was the warm smile of someone about to share hard-won wisdom. "That's exactly what I'm going to teach you, Bill. There's one phrase, one simple mantra that changed everything for me. When I learned to truly embody these 5 words, my entire life transformed. Are you ready to learn the most powerful boundary you'll ever set?"
And so, that afternoon on the mountain, Frank shared with Bill the wisdom that took decades to build. You just heard a story that could be your own story, couldn't it? Maybe you recognized yourself in Bill, someone who felt exhausted, manipulated, always on the defensive. Or perhaps you saw fragments of your own life in the 6 types that Frank described. The energy vampires who make you question your own sanity, the drama magnets who turn your family into a battlefield, the controllers who destroy your independence while disguising it as care, the guilt trippers who use your love as a weapon against you, the dream crushers who convince you it's too late to dream, and the professional victims who drain your energy with suffering competitions. But the most powerful lesson Frank taught Bill, and what I want to leave with you today, are those 5 transformative words. My peace is my power. If any of these types hit deep in your experience, if you recognized someone in your life in these descriptions, leave a comment below. Simply write energy vampire or drama magnet or whatever type resonated most with you. Your courage to name it might help other people recognize their own situations. And if this story brought clarity to your life, if you're ready to reclaim your peace like Frank taught Bill, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because here's the truth. You no longer have to accept other people stealing your serenity. You've learned that your peace is your power, and now no one can take that away from you anymore. Frank walked down from that mountain knowing he had passed on the most important wisdom of his life. Bill walked down transformed, finally free from the invisible chains that bound him. And you? Are you ready to walk down your own mountain with the same power that Bill discovered? Your peace is your power, and today you finally know how to protect it.